no man will ever actually marry you. My mother said it the way people mention the weather, in front of everyone 6 weeks before my wedding. Then she invented a championship game for my golden brother, Cole, so the family would have somewhere more important to be that day. My name is Adeline Ashby. I'm 36. I teach second grade. I didn't beg. I didn't correct the lie. I just let them go. The morning after, a single photo from that wedding spread across the internet. Before lunch, 99 missed calls buried my phone. They weren't calling to apologize. They were calling because of the man standing beside me and the woman I'd quietly become. The empty chair they'd chosen became the most expensive mistake my family ever made. Before I tell you who was standing beside me in that picture and what almost 10 years of silence had quietly made me, I want to say one thing. If you've ever been the one your family counted out, the quiet one, the only a teacher one, you already understand the first half of this story. Subscribe so the second half finds you, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Now, let me take you back to where the silence started. At my mother's table, the serving dish always reached me last. By the time the roasted potatoes made it around, past my father, past Cole's wife and their daughter, there were only the broken ones left, the small gray ones from the bottom of the pan that nobody else wanted. I had learned not to mind. I had learned a lot of things at that table. Cole closed another deal this week, my mother said, filling his glass before he had emptied it. Biggest one yet. Tell them, honey. Cole leaned back and talked about square footage and commission, and my father nodded along like a man watching his own reflection win an award. My mother watched Cole the way some people watch a sunrise. When he finished, the room held the kind of warm silence families build around the person they have decided to love most. Then, my mother turned to me, and the temperature changed by a single degree. And Adeline teaches the little ones, she added, as you might mention that someone walks dogs for a living. Someone has to, I suppose. I said the potatoes were perfect. I had learned which sentences were safe. This is the part outsiders never believe. It is not the cruelty that breaks you. Cruelty you can name, point at, carry to someone else, and say, look what they did. It is the smallness, the steady daily arithmetic of being made less at a table where you are still, technically, welcome. My chair was always there. My plate was always set. I had a place in that family. It was the edge. I had tested the shape of that edge for years, the way you test a sore tooth. The Thanksgiving I drove 4 hours with a pie, made from Edith's recipe, and my mother thanked the cousin who'd brought a store cake and let my pie sit untouched until I carried it home again. The birthdays where Cole's were planned for months, and mine were remembered, if at all, by a card left on the counter. None of it was the kind of thing you could hold up to a stranger. Each piece was too small. It was only when you set them side by side, year after year, that you could see the shape they made. My father never said the cruel things, he just never said the other things either. He was a man who had decided, long ago, that peace meant facing whatever direction my mother was already facing, and he had faced that direction so long, he'd forgotten he had a neck. When she made me smaller, he studied his plate. His silence was its own kind of vote. For years, I wished he would argue with her. Later, I understood that a man who won't stand up for you is only a slower way of being left. After dinner, I walked the hallway toward the back of the house and past the wall my mother called the family wall. Cole at his college graduation. Cole at 19 in his baseball uniform. Gold light behind him, like the photographer had ordered it special. Cole holding his daughter, Lily, the morning she was born. And low on the wall, between a school portrait and a framed newspaper clipping about Cole's travel team, there was a rectangle of paint, a half shade brighter than the rest. A nail still in the plaster. A space where a photograph had hung once and been taken down. I knew whose face used to be in that gap. I had stopped asking about it years ago. Lily was sitting cross-legged on the hallway floor with a book open in her lap, 7 years old, mouthing the words to herself the way kids do before they trust the silent reading. She didn't look up. "This is my favorite book in the whole world," she said. "Have you read it?" The cover was soft and furred at the corners, worn down by what must have been 100 bedtimes. I looked at it for a long moment. I told her I'd heard it was wonderful. The book in her arms had no idea it knew me. To them, I was small. They had never once looked closely. When I was a child, my chair was the one that didn't match. The dining set had 4 matching chairs and 1 folding chair from the garage, and the folding chair lived at my end of the table, brought out and put away like a guest who never quite became family. I don't think anyone decided this on purpose. That is the thing about being the lesser child. No one signs an order. It simply settles over you, like dust, until one day you realize you have spent your whole life apologizing for taking up a chair. Cole brought home a trophy in 4th grade, and it went up on the mantle that afternoon. I brought home a story I'd written, a real one, 6 pages, and my teacher had stapled a gold star to the front. My mother said it was nice and put it in a drawer. Only one of those things got hung where the light could reach it. I learned to read the difference. I learned to want less out loud. In 5th grade, I won the school's writing prize, a certificate and a paperback dictionary, and there was a small assembly where they read the winning story aloud. I had told my family the date 3 times. I scanned the folding chairs in the gymnasium the whole time they read my words, looking for a face I knew. Cole had a game that afternoon. My parents went to the game. I walked home with the dictionary under my arm and set it on my shelf, and I did not tell them I had won, because telling them would have meant watching them not care, and I had already done that from a stage. But there was one person in that house who watched me differently. My grandmother Edith had a small house at the end of a gravel road, and a lamp she kept burning in the front window every single night, winter and summer, whether she was expecting anyone or not. When I was 19 and 20 and 21, I used to drive out there with my notebooks, and she would make tea that was too strong and sit across from me at her kitchen table and ask me to read out loud. Not the way my mother asked, with one ear. The way you ask for something you have been hungry for. The first night I brought her a story, I almost didn't take it out of my bag. It was about a lighthouse keeper, and I was certain it was foolish. Edith waited. She had a way of waiting that made silence feel like a chair pulled out for you. So I read it, my voice going thin in the places I thought were weak, and when I finished, she didn't tell me it was good. She told me which sentence had made her put her hand flat on the table. She remembered a line about the keeper climbing the stairs in the dark, said it back to me from memory. And then she said, "You did that. You made a stranger climb those stairs beside him. Don't you ever let anyone tell you that's a small thing." She read everything I wrote. She underlined the lines she loved in soft pencil so she could erase them if I ever wanted the page clean again. One night, late, when I told her I didn't think I was the kind of person things happened for, she set down her cup and looked at me until I looked back. She told me the thing I have carried every day since. The right ones always find the light you leave on, Addie. You just have to leave it on. You don't get to choose when they come. You only get to keep it burning. The kettle ticked as it cooled. Outside her window, the lamp threw a long, warm rectangle across the gravel and into the dark. I didn't say anything. Some sentences you don't answer. You just hold them up to the light and turn them over and decide, quietly, to believe them. She made me believe a light was worth leaving on. The window at the end of the gravel road went dark the winter I turned 23. It was fast, which everyone kept telling me was a mercy, as if speed were a kind of kindness. I sat in the back of the room at the service in a dress my mother had chosen for me, and when it was over, my mother put her hand on my shoulder and said the only thing she would say about Edith all year. She always did spoil you. That night, I drove out to the house at the end of the gravel road and let myself in with the key I still had. The rooms smelled like her. I crossed to the front window and turned the lamp on. Then I sat down on the floor beneath it, and I could not make my hands reach up and turn it back off. I stayed there until the windows went gray with morning. The only light that had ever truly seen me had gone out. So I started leaving one on myself. I told no one why. Edith was gone. The wanting to be seen was not. In the spring, I turned 25. A letter arrived that I read 4 times standing at the mailbox. It was thin and official, and it said I had been selected, one of 12 writers in the region, for a children's literature fellowship, a week of workshops, editors in the room, a public reading on the final night. I had submitted under my own name, on a whim, half expecting nothing, and here it was. An invitation to be looked at by people whose whole job was looking carefully. I had not known until I held that letter how much I wanted it. I lay awake that week, imagining the room. Editors who would read a page and mark it and hand it back changed. A reading on the final night where, for once, the people listening would have chosen to be there. I bought a new notebook for it. I rehearsed the piece I'd read until I could say it with my eyes closed. For 1 week, I let myself believe I was the kind of person a door might open for. I have learned since that hope is not the dangerous thing. Hope is only love pointed at the future. The dangerous thing is the hand that waits until your back is turned. I folded the letter into the pocket of my coat and drove to my mother's house, because some part of me was still 19 and still believed that if I just brought home the right thing, the gold star would go on the wall. "That's a long drive for a little reading," my mother said, drying a glass. "We'll see if it's really worth it." I should have heard it then. I didn't. The week came, the morning of the final reading, the one with the editors, the one that mattered. My phone rang before I had finished packing the car. It was Bethany, Cole's wife, and her voice was strange and tight. "There had been an emergency," she said. "My mother needed me. I had to come now." I drove the 2 hours back with both hands locked on the wheel, my mind running through every terrible thing, and when I arrived, there was no emergency. There was my mother in the kitchen, perfectly fine, vaguely surprised to see me so worked up, saying something about a misunderstanding, about how I always did overreact. By the time I understood that nothing was wrong, the reading was over. The editors had gone home. The one door that had ever opened for me had closed while I sat in traffic. I told myself it was bad luck. People have bad luck. I packed the disappointment down small, where I kept everything else, and I went back to my classroom and my second graders, and I did not apply for anything like it again. Bethany had been standing in that kitchen when I arrived. She had heard the whole thing. It was almost a year before she told me. She came to my apartment on a gray afternoon and sat at my little table with both hands wrapped around a cup of tea she never drank, and she could not look at me. And finally she said it. "There was no emergency, Adeline." The room went very still. "Your mother told me what to say. She told me to call you and tell you to come, and to keep you on the phone as long as I could." Bethany turned the cup a quarter turn on the table. "There was no hospital. No one was sick. She did it so you'd miss the reading. I've been sick about it for a year." I remember the cup. I remember the small ceramic sound it made against the wood when she turned it. I do not remember standing, but I was standing. "I was unlucky," I said. The words came out wrong, like a sentence in a language I was forgetting. "You were targeted," Bethany said. I had spent my whole life believing I was simply a person things did not happen for. In one afternoon, at one small table, that belief turned over and showed me its underside, and the underside was a hand. A deliberate hand. My mother's. I did not scream. I did not call her. I looked at Bethany, who had carried this for a year, because she could not carry it any longer, and I made the only decision that felt like mine. Then I'll stop giving her things to ruin. And I did. Slowly. The way you wean yourself off something. I stopped mentioning the stories. When my mother asked, vaguely, what I'd been up to, I said grading, lesson plans, the small, true, boring things, and watched her attention drift away on schedule. I stopped bringing pies. I stopped announcing dates. I built a version of myself for that family exactly as small as they already believed me to be, and I let them have her, and I kept the rest. It was not revenge. It was triage. You do not keep handing your softest things to someone who has shown you, twice now, what they do with them. I stopped telling them anything at all. If someone in your own family had done that, invented a crisis to make certain you failed, what would you have done? Told everyone at the next holiday? Walked out and never come back? I'll tell you exactly what I did, but I want your answer first, so put it in the comments before you hear mine. Then stay with me, because what I built next, I built somewhere they could not reach it. I had a manuscript by then, a small one, a story about a child who leaves a light burning in a window for someone who is still finding their way home. I had written it for no one. I had written it for Edith. There is a particular kind of quiet you can build out of a wound if you are careful, and I became very careful. On the gray afternoons after Bethany's confession, I rewrote it until the sentences were clean, and then, because I had nothing to lose that hadn't already been taken, I sent it to a small publisher called Maple Lane Books. An editor named Frances called me 3 weeks later. She had a low, certain voice, the voice of a woman who had spent decades telling writers the truth. "This is the one," she said. "This is the book." I held the phone and didn't trust my own voice, and Frances kept talking gently, the way you talk to something that might bolt. "Write it for the one child who needs it," she said. "Don't write it for the room. Don't write it for the people who didn't clap. Write it for the one kid in the dark, and let everyone else find you later." Then she asked the question that changed everything. "And what name do you want on the cover?" I thought about the family wall. The bright rectangle where my face used to be. The drawer where the gold star went. I thought about how, for my entire life, my name had been a thing that arrived in a room and made people's attention slide somewhere else. "Not mine," I said. "Maybe not ever." Frances was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Some writers spend their whole lives wanting their name on the building. The good ones just want the light on inside it." For the first time in my life, being unseen felt like a thing I had chosen, rather than a thing that had been done to me. The book came out the next year. The name on the cover was Marlowe Quinn. It was not my name. I chose it the way you choose a coat you can disappear into, something plain and warm and nobody's. But the last page of that book, the final illustration, was a child setting a lamp in a window, the light spilling gold across the dark towards someone walking home. That was mine. That was Edith's. I put her line in the story, soft, where a careful reader might find it, and I told no one whose words they were. The first copy arrived in a padded envelope on an ordinary Tuesday. I sat on my kitchen floor and held it and ran my thumb over the name that wasn't mine, and I did not feel hidden. I felt safe, which is a different thing. For the first time, the work could be loved without me standing in a doorway, waiting to watch whose attention slid away. A few weeks later, I drove to a bookstore 2 towns over, just to see it on a shelf. There was a girl there, maybe 8, sitting on the floor in the picture book section with my book open in her lap, exactly the way Lily would sit years later. She didn't know me. She would never know me. She turned to the last page, the lamp in the window, and she went very still, the way children go still when a book has reached into them and found the lonely place and set a hand on it. I bought a coffee I didn't want, just to stand near her another minute. Then I drove home. Frances had been right. I had written it for the one kid in the dark, and the kid had found it. I had given the truth a name they would never suspect. The book about the light in the window sold out its first printing before my family ever asked what I did with my weekends. I want you to understand how strange the next years were, because they are the engine of everything that followed. Marlowe Quinn grew. One book became 3, became a shelf, became a name parents said to each other in libraries and bookstores the way you recommend something that helped your kid sleep, helped your kid cry, helped your kid feel less alone in the dark. 10 years. Roughly a book a year. A name the country came to know without ever seeing a face, because I never gave them one, and Frances built a wall around my privacy like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then a network adapted the books into a children's show called Story House, and the show found an audience the books never could have reached on their own. Millions of kids. It happened at the table. One Sunday, Cole was talking about Lily's bedtime, and he said the only books that ever calmed her down were the Marlowe Quinn ones, and my mother said yes. Weren't they wonderful? She'd read every one to Lily herself, and my father said he'd heard the author was some recluse who never showed her face. Probably ran the whole thing from a mansion somewhere. They passed my secret around the table like a dish, admiring it, and I sat at the edge with my hands in my lap and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would not have been a door. "You should write Lily a story sometime," Cole said to me then, not unkindly, the way you suggest a hobby to someone whose life seems thin. She'd get a kick out of it, Auntie Adeline's little story. "Maybe I will," I said. My mother laughed her easy laugh. "Stick to what you're good at, sweetheart. Crayons and nap time." She turned back to Cole. "Now, Marlowe Quinn, there's a real writer. I have turned that moment over more times than I can count, and I have never decided whether it was the cruelest thing she ever said to me or the funniest." She sat 3 feet from a real writer and told her to stick to crayons while praising the writer she could not see. My family loved a name. They had no idea they'd raised it. It got stranger than that. One evening I was at the house, and my mother had Lily curled against her on the couch, and she was reading to her. I came in from the kitchen and saw the cover and stopped in the doorway with a dish towel still in my hands, because the book she was holding was mine. She read it. That is the part I have never been able to explain to anyone. She read my book to my niece, her voice going soft in the soft places, and when she reached the last page, the page with the lamp in the window, she read the line that had been Edith's before it was ever Marlowe Quinn's. And she left a light in the window for the right one to find. Lily pressed her face into my mother's arm. "Marlowe Quinn knows exactly how I feel," she whispered. I stood in that doorway and did not move until the chapter ended. When my mother closed the book, I went back into the kitchen and ran the tap over a stack of dishes that were already clean, and I let the water run for a long time. My mother had read my grandmother's words aloud, in my grandmother's cadence, to my grandmother's great-granddaughter, and felt nothing, because she didn't know, because she had never once looked closely enough to know. The strangest moment of all was the smallest. A boy in my second-grade class brought the newest Marlowe Quinn book to school in his backpack and set it on his desk like a treasure during free reading. He saw me looking and held it up. "Miss Ashby, this is the best book in the whole world," he said. "Have you read it?" "Once or twice," I told him. Edith's light was burning in 1,000 windows now, and not one person who loved it knew my hand had lit it. There were nights it sat heavy on me. I won't pretend there weren't. You can choose a silence and still feel its weight on your chest at 2 a.m. There were award announcements I read alone in bed, school book fairs where children lined up for a signature that wasn't mine to give in person. A starred review I taped inside a kitchen cabinet where no visitor would ever open it. I had built a life the whole country could see, and my own family could not. And there is a specific loneliness in being celebrated by strangers and overlooked at your mother's table on the same afternoon. But every time the weight got too heavy, I thought about the girl on the bookstore floor, and the boy at the desk, and Lily pressing her face into a page, and I understood I had not disappeared. I had only moved the light to where it could do the most good. Edith, of all people, would have understood that. I had 2 lives. Only the smaller one had my real name. Then a project for the show put a man in the same room as me, and the careful quiet I had built started, very slowly, to let in light. Theo Vance carried 2 cups of coffee across a crowded production office and set one down in front of me without asking how I took it, because he had noticed, weeks before, how I took it. That was the first thing. The noticing. We had been working at a distance for years. Me, hidden behind Francis and a pen name, him the public face of a thing built from my pages. And we had finally been put in a room together for a project, and I had braced myself the way I braced for everyone. For the slide of attention, for the warm dismissal. It didn't come. He asked about the books, at first, the way everyone did. But then he stopped asking about Marlowe Quinn and started asking about me. What I'd been like as a kid. Whether I still taught because I had to or because I wanted to. What I was afraid of. He listened the way Edith had listened, like the answer was something he intended to keep. I didn't fall for Marlowe Quinn. He told me one evening, near the end of the project, both of us tired and unguarded. I'd like to know, Adeline. He had asked about me. No one had asked about me in years. It grew in small, specific ways. He remembered things. The name of my classroom's hamster, which I'd mentioned once. That I hated phone calls and loved long letters, so he wrote me long letters on actual paper in a careful slanting hand. The first time I cried in front of him, over something small. A hard day, a kid in my class whose home life I couldn't fix. He didn't try to solve it, and he didn't look away. He sat with me in it. My whole life, I'd been taught my feelings were an overreaction, a thing to be managed and made smaller. And here was a man who treated them like weather he was content to stand out in. One evening he asked, carefully, why a writer the whole country loved still got up at 6 to teach 7-year-olds to read. I told him the truth, which I had never said out loud. Because in that classroom, I'm not hiding, I said. Those kids see exactly who I am. They're the only people in my life who do. He looked at me a long moment. Not the only people, he said. Not anymore. It grew slowly, the way real things do. He learned the rhythms of a person who had spent a life making herself small, and he never once tried to make me bigger for the room. He stood beside me in private and asked for nothing in public. When I told him I wasn't ready for the world to know my real name, he didn't argue. When you're ready, the world can know, he said. Not before. By then, Francis and Theo had quietly begun planning something for the following spring. A public evening to mark 10 years of Marlowe Quinn, the night I would finally step out of the dark and say my own name, on my own terms, in my own time. I had decided I was ready to be seen. I just wanted to choose the moment myself. He asked me to marry him in a kitchen, with no one watching, which was exactly right. My family will be the last to know, I told him, turning the ring on my finger, if at all. I said yes. I told my family nothing. Then I made one mistake. I told them the date. I set my fork down on the edge of my plate at my mother's table and told them I was getting married on the 4th of April. I did not tell them his name. I had decided, somewhere on the drive over, that I would offer them this one thing, a date, a chance, and see what they did with it. The table went quiet in the specific way it went quiet around me, and then my mother laughed. Not cruelly, which was worse. The easy laugh of someone sharing an obvious truth among friends. "Oh, Adeline." She shook her head. "No man will ever actually marry you. Let's be realistic." She said it the way people mention the weather. My father studied his plate. Cole almost smiled. Bethany looked at her lap. And I sat with my hand flat on the table and felt the old heat climb my neck. And I did not argue, because arguing was a door I had stopped walking through. "The wedding is the 4th of April," I said again, evenly. "I'd love for you to come." I didn't tell them his name. They didn't ask. A few days later, my mother suddenly remembered that Cole's team had a championship that very weekend. It arrived as a group message, the kind of thing she was careful to make sound like logistics and loyalty. Cole coached an elite youth travel team, and travel teams play tournaments most weekends in spring. And there was, my mother announced, a very important championship game on the 4th, and of course the whole family would be there, because family supports each other, because that was the kind of people we were. Cole coached that team. He had to have known there was no game as well as I did, and he had let her say it anyway. I read it twice. Something about it sat wrong in my chest, a small, cold weight, and I have learned to trust that weight. So I opened the tournament's app, the public one, where every bracket and every game is posted and time-stamped for any parent to see. Cole's team wasn't in it. I checked the date again. I checked the next weekend and the one before. There was no game on the 4th of April. The tournament my mother had described had closed its registration months earlier, in February, and his team's name appeared nowhere in any bracket on any field in the state that Saturday. There was a public schedule. It was specific, it was dated, and it had no game in it at all. I did not want to believe it, which is its own kind of evidence. You only refuse to believe the things that cost you. So I checked again, slower. I called the number for the tournament organizer listed on the site, and a tired, friendly man confirmed what the bracket already said. Registration had closed in February, the field was set, and there was no team by Cole's name and no game by my mother's description anywhere that weekend. I thanked him. I set the phone down on the counter. My hands were steady, which surprised me. Some part of me had already known. Some part of me had known since a kitchen 11 years before. Then I scrolled back through the family thread and found the message my mother had sent, 3 days after I gave them the date. "We'll all be at Cole's championship that Saturday. Family first. We can do something for Adeline another time." I sat very still and let the two facts settle on top of each other until they fit. There was no game. There had never been a game. There had never been an emergency in that kitchen 11 years ago, either. The same trick. 11 years apart. The same hand. I had the proof in my hand, the empty bracket, the time-stamped schedule, the message in her own words. The only question left was what I was going to do with it. That night I showed Theo. I laid it all out on the table between us and watched his jaw tighten the way a kind man's does when he meets a cruelty he can't talk himself out of believing. "You could send this back to her," he said quietly. "Right now, you could send it to all of them. I could. Do you want to?" I thought about it honestly because he deserved an honest answer, and so did I. I imagined the satisfaction of it, sharp and brief as a struck match. And then I imagined what came after the match went out, my mother explaining, reframing, recruiting my father's silence and Cole's shrug, turning my proof into one more family argument I would spend the rest of my life litigating. I imagined handing her, one final time, the power to make me react. "No," I said. "If I fight her with this, the wedding becomes about her. Everything always becomes about her. I'm done doing that." I closed the folder on my screen. "I'm just going to go get married." Theo reached across the table and put his hand over mine. "Okay," he said. "Then that's what we'll do." My mother called that night to confirm, in her warmest voice, that they would all be at Cole's game and so sorry to miss my little ceremony. I held the phone and looked out my own window, at the lamp I had kept burning there for 11 years, and I understood that there was nothing left to win in that house. You cannot earn a chair from people who took your photo off the wall. "Go to the game then," I said. "I won't ask again." I did not correct the lie. I want you to understand that this was not weakness. Correcting it would have been begging. Pulling up the bracket, reading her own message back to her, demanding she admit it. All of that would have been one more time I stood at that table asking to be let in. I didn't beg. I didn't correct it. I let them go. They had no idea what they were choosing to miss. They picked a game that did not exist over a daughter they did not know. The morning of the 4th of April, the wind off the water was warm, and Theo's hand on mine was steady, and I had decided that 2 empty chairs would not be allowed to ruin the best day of my life. There were 30 people there. People who had actually seen me. Frances in a hat she'd clearly bought for the occasion, teachers from my school, 2 of my oldest friends. And in the front row, where my mother and father might have sat, there were 2 empty chairs, white, ribboned, facing the place where I would stand. I had left them, not as a wound, as a fact, as the truth of who had chosen to be there, and who had not. I had thought it would hurt more than it did. The morning had its sharp moment. I was alone for a few minutes before the ceremony, in a small room with a mirror, in a dress no one had chosen for me, and I caught myself listening for the sound of my mother's voice in the hallway, out of pure old habit, the way you reach for a railing that was taken out years ago. It wasn't there. It was never going to be there. I breathed through it. Then Frances knocked and came in with her ridiculous hat and her wet eyes and told me I looked like something out of one of my own books, and the old reflex let go of me, and I went out to get married. There is a thing that happens when you finally stop waiting for the people who are never coming. The room gets quieter, and then, strangely, larger. I looked out at 30 faces who had driven and flown and rearranged their lives to sit in that room, and I understood that I had been counting the wrong chairs my whole life. I had spent 36 years staring at the 2 that were empty. It had never once occurred to me to count the ones that were full. Theo said his vows in a voice that didn't perform, didn't reach for the crowd, just reached for me. "I see you," he said. "I always did." Frances leaned over as the music started and whispered, loud enough that I laughed through the tightness in my throat. Edith would be absolutely insufferable right now. 2 empty chairs, like a gap on a wall. That evening, after the toasts, after the cake, after the slow, unhurried joy of a small room full of people who were genuinely glad, one of the guests took a single photograph. Theo and me, his arm around me, both of us mid-laugh, and posted it somewhere with 3 kind words and no idea what it would do. It was not a posed photograph. That is the part I think about. No one had arranged us. The guest had simply caught the half-second where Theo leaned in to say something only I could hear, and I laughed before he finished. And you could see, in the picture, that the laugh was real, and that the man was looking at the woman the way no one in my family had ever once looked at her. A stranger scrolling past it would not have known any of the story. They would only have known that whatever was happening in that frame, they wanted it. That, in the end, was all it took. I didn't see it. I had turned my phone off before the ceremony and left it in a drawer, and I slept that night better than I had slept in years. There is a particular kind of rest that comes only after you stop performing for an audience that was never going to clap. I had stopped. I slept like the dead. In a good way, in a quiet room, beside a man who had married me on purpose. Someone posted that photo the night of the 4th. By morning, strangers were recognizing the man beside me. I married him in a quiet room. The quiet did not last. My phone was face down in the drawer when it started to move. I turned it over. A photo. Our photo. Already shared past any number I could hold. The comments all asked one thing. Who is she? Who did he marry? Because they knew him. The whole country knew his face from the show their children watched. They did not know mine. I made coffee. I let it buzz. It did not stop buzzing. By the time I poured the cup, the number under the photo did not look real. By the time I drank it, the number had doubled. People weren't just sharing it, they were searching. A wedding means a license. A license means a name. Someone found a guest who had tagged the venue. The venue gave a date. The date gave them a question, and the whole internet wanted it answered at once. Who was the woman the most beloved host on children's television had just, quietly, married? I watched it happen on a screen, in my kitchen, holding a coffee gone cold. There was nothing to do but watch it arrive. By the time the cup was empty, the question had changed. It wasn't who is the bride anymore. The internet wanted a name. It got mine. The name it found was not Adeline Ashby. Someone connected the man to the show. Someone connected the show to its source. Someone asked the obvious question, who is the woman the famous host of Story House just married? And someone else, faster than I would have believed, found the answer the publisher had been about to announce anyway, 10 days early. The reclusive author, 10 years, 10 books, a name the whole country knew, and a face no one had ever seen. It was the bride in the photograph. By that Monday, the publisher confirmed it. They moved the announcement up because the truth was already loose, and they said it plainly, in print, where it could not be unsaid. Marlo Quinn had a face now, and a husband, and the face belonged to a second-grade teacher named Adeline Ashby. My phone did not stop. By lunch, there were 99 missed calls. I knew the numbers without looking. My mother, my father, Cole, my mother again, my mother again. There was a text from my mother at the top of the stack, sent somewhere in the avalanche, and I read it once. Adeline? Is this real? Why didn't you tell us? I did not answer. They'd had 11 years to ask. They had read my books to their children. They had watched the show in my mother's living room with the sound up. They had said the name Marlo Quinn at dinner tables and in the car, and never once turned their heads. They had said my grandmother's words aloud and felt nothing, because they did not know whose words they were, because they had never looked closely enough to know. I found out later, from Bethany, what those 2 days had looked like inside that house. My mother had refreshed the same article until the screen went warm in her hand. My father kept saying, it couldn't be the same Adeline. There must be two. And Cole had sat very quietly and then said the one thing none of them had a defense for. She's the one Lily reads every single night. Mom, you read it to her. My mother had gone into the kitchen and not come out for a long time because there are some arithmetic problems that only have one answer, and she had finally been handed hers. They were not undone because they had lost me. They were undone because the whole country could suddenly see what they had thrown away, and there was no version of the story where they came out as anything but the people who weren't there. And on the one Saturday, it would have cost them nothing to look. They had chosen a game that did not exist. 99 calls from the people who skipped a wedding. And there was already a stage waiting for me, booked months before any of them knew my name. The night of the 11th, I stood in the wings of a theater while 1,000 people found their seats, and I held a single page of paper, and the stage light past the curtain was warm and gold and waiting. This was the evening Francis and Theo had planned a year ago, the night I had chosen on my own terms to step out of the dark. The photograph had only made the room bigger and the timing sharper. I had decided long before any of this that I would finally say my own name out loud. I was only going to say it sooner, and to more people, than I'd planned. I walked out into the light. I did not talk about my family. They were not there. I did not pull a phone from my pocket and read a group message to 1,000 strangers, though I could have, and a younger version of me, the one who still wanted the gold star on the wall, might have. I simply stood at the center of a room, me, the girl from the folding chair at the edge of the table. And I told them the truth about who had been writing to their children in the dark for 10 years. I told them my name. I told them I was a teacher, that I still got up at 6 in the morning to teach 2nd grade, and a sound went through the room when I said it. Not laughter, the opposite of the laughter I'd heard at my mother's table. I told them I had written the first book for a grandmother who died before she could read it, and the second because the first had found a child on a bookstore floor, and the rest because once you know there is a kid somewhere in the dark, you cannot stop leaving lights on. I did not perform any of it. I had spent a lifetime making my voice small. I let it be exactly its own size. And then, near the end, I told them about the lamp. I wrote under a name that wasn't mine for 10 years, I said, and my voice carried out over all those still faces. I'd like to say my real one now, but first, I want to tell you where the light in those books came from, because it was never mine either. I told them about a small house at the end of a gravel road, and a grandmother who kept a lamp burning in her window every night of her life, for no one and for anyone, and who told a frightened girl the only sentence that ever truly held her. And I gave them Edith's words, exactly as she had given them to me. The right ones always find the light you leave on. You just have to leave it on. You don't get to choose when they come. You only get to keep it burning. I put that line in every book I ever wrote, I said. I never told anyone it was hers. Tonight, I'm telling you. Her name was Edith. She saw me when no one else bothered to look. Everything you've loved in those pages, you have been loving a little of her. The room was very quiet. The light was very warm. The woman from the edge of the table stood at the center of the room. I could have ended my family with one screenshot. I had it on my phone the whole time. The empty bracket, the time-stamped schedule, my mother's own message in her own words, choosing a game that did not exist over my wedding. One post, one reply to one of those 99 calls with a picture attached. The whole country was already watching, and they would have believed me, because the proof was real and dated and hers. I sat in the quiet of my hotel room that night with my thumb resting on that screenshot, and I looked at it for a long time, and then I set the phone face down on the nightstand. Exposing them would have made all of this about them. About her. And it was never about them. It was about a light in a window and a grandmother who kept it burning, and 10 years of work I had done in the dark because I loved it, not because I was hiding from them. The moment I posted that screenshot, I would have handed them the one thing they had always wanted from me, my attention, my fury, my proof that they still had the power to make me react. I had the proof. I never used it. Only one person from that family ever told me the truth. And I owed it to her to hear what she had to say. If you have ever held the thing that could burn it all down, the message, the photo, the proof, and chosen to set it on the table and walk away instead, you already understand what the last part of this cost. Tell me about your version in the comments. I read them. All of them. There is one more person you need to meet first. They lost control of a story they thought they owned. Bethany came to see me a few weeks later, and she brought Lily's book. It was the same soft, furred cover I'd seen in the hallway. The spine creased white from being opened 100 times, and Bethany set it on the table between us, the way you set down something you finally understood the weight of. She had been crying before she arrived. She sat across from me, and her hands were not steady. And when she spoke, her voice broke on the second word, and she let it. I read her your books. she said. Every night, for years. I picked them off the shelf, and I read them to Lily, and I never... She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. I never knew they were yours. The book sat between us, worn soft by my niece's bedtimes. I knew they were wrong about you, Bethany said. I knew it the day I made that phone call 11 years ago, and I knew it at every dinner since, and I never said anything because I was afraid of what it would cost me in that family. I told myself reading her your books was enough. It wasn't. I'm sorry it took the whole world finding out for me to finally say it out loud. I let the silence sit a moment before I answered. You were a kid yourself when you made that call, I said. 23, married into a family that ran on one person's approval. You were scared. I understand scared. You don't owe me 11 years of apology. Her face came apart then, quietly, and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, and for a moment neither of us said anything at all. She had carried my words to my niece for years, in the dark, without knowing they were mine. It was, in its way, the only true light anyone in that family had ever passed me. Keep reading them to her, I said. For the rest of them, I made a different choice. There is a lamp in the window of the home I share with Theo now. I keep it on every night, some habits you inherit on purpose. I answered exactly one of those 99 calls in the end. Not with my voice, with 6 lines, typed once and sent once, to the number at the top of the stack. In my own head, for 36 years, she had been my mother. That night, for the first time, I wrote to her as Carol. Carol, I'm not angry, I'm not going to share what I have, and I think we both know what that is. I'm just done asking to be seen. The door isn't slammed, it's just closed, and I'm the one who gets to decide when it opens. Be well. She wrote back 4 times. I didn't read past the first line of the first one. People want this story to end with a reckoning. A scene at a table, the proof slammed down, the family stricken and sorry. I understand the hunger for it. I had it too once. But I have learned that the loudest revenge is not the one that lasts. The thing that lasts is the boundary. Quiet, unspectacular, mine. They did not lose me in a blaze. They lost me the way you lose a light you never bothered to look at, until one night you glance up and the window is simply dark, and you realize, far too late, that someone had been keeping it burning for you all along. People ask me if I miss them. It is the wrong question, and I understand why they ask it. The honest answer is that I miss something that never existed. The mother who would have driven through the night for the real reason. The father who would have used his voice. The family that would have looked closely enough to see the writer at their own table. You can grieve a thing you never got to have. I did for a while. And then I stopped, because there was a lamp to keep on, and a husband who knew how I took my coffee, and a niece who still falls asleep to my grandmother's words. I think about the 2 empty chairs sometimes, the white-ribboned chairs in the front row, facing the place where I stood. They chose those chairs. They chose the game that didn't exist. And in choosing them, they made themselves, permanently and publicly, the family that wasn't there. While 1,000 strangers, and one good man, and a grandmother long gone, were. I left a light on for almost 10 years. The right people found it. They always do. I didn't need them to see me anymore. A generation already had,